reading from the script here because when I tried to improvise, I just got rambly and didn't really know what to say. The character you see on my shirt is called Deadman. Deadman is a ghostly superhero owned by DC Comics, created in 1967 by writer Arnold Drake and artist Carmine Infantino, although the artist Neil Adams also played an extremely important role in his initial stories. Deadman is my favorite superhero and my favorite fictional character of all time, and I've spent the last year collecting various books and bits of merchandise featuring him. What I'm showing in this video is my Deadman collection. It's not terribly funny, it's not entertaining, and to pretty much everyone but me and a handful of others, I doubt it's even that important. So if you're not interested in such a thing, back out now. But if you are, let me share this with you. The first thing I want to show here in my collection is Deadman's original stories from the Silver Age of comic books. The original Deadman story was his origin. Deadman was the stage name of a circus acrobat named Boston Brand, who was shot one night during his high wire act by a gunman with a hook for a hand. On his way to the afterlife, Boston's soul was intercepted by the goddess Ramakrishna, the keeper of the balance, who offered him the chance to catch his murderer. He stayed on the mortal plane as a ghost, unable to be seen or heard by the living, but able to possess them. And his hunt for his killer took him all over the world, where he saw the ugly underbelly of society. Deadman eventually caught up with his murderer and defeated the true evil behind his death. And when Rama told him his work was done, he flipped out and yelled about the ugly world he saw and decided to stick around to help make things better for the living. Deadman's first story ran from Strange Adventures number 205 to Strange Adventures number 216, and also includes The Brave and the Bold number 79. These stories, among others, have been collected by DC in the past few years in a couple trade paperbacks. Deadman Book 1 and Deadman Book 2. There are more stories in Deadman Book 2 beyond the initial Strange Adventures stories, as well as a Deadman Book 3. Deadman Book 4 has been announced to be released in January 2014, which has been a really long wait since Deadman Book 3 was released in December of 2012. It's not a high priority for them. But in addition to these, I have an original copy of Strange Adventures number 207, the third comic book to ever feature Deadman, that I bought earlier this year at a convention. It's not a very good copy, it's not in high quality, I got it for pretty cheap, only for like $20. So, it's not big or important or valuable, but it's just something kind of cool to own. Deadman's original tale in Strange Adventures number 216 ended with a bit of a cliffhanger, or more really like a sequel hook, the kind you see in pretty much every big blockbuster movie these days, where they want to make a sequel. But where for a blockbuster movie, you might have to wait 2 or 3 years, we got this sequel hook in 1969, and it wasn't followed up on for 16 years. Deadman's second starring role in comics came along in the year 1985, during the 50th anniversary of DC Comics as a company. This 4-issue series was created by, let's see, I have it written down here, the writer, Andrew Helper, and the artist, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. It ran for 4 issues, and it was about another ghost who was basically Deadman's predecessor and an evil version of him, trying to destroy the goddess Ramakrishna and her place of power, a Shangri-La city called, or a city like Shangri-La called Nanda Parbat, where some of the most evil people in the world are forcibly taken and reformed and live for almost forever in peace. The thing is, this book hasn't really ever been collected in any kind of graphic novel form, but the original 4 issues were pretty easy to come by online for decent quality, and they were pretty cheap. But this was not the end of the story. The story, however, would not be continued again until, well, I guess, another 16 years in 2001, when writer Steve Vance and artists Rick Burchett, Leonard Kirk, and Jim Aparo would make a 5-issue miniseries called Deadman Dead Again. Now, this series took Deadman through some of the biggest superhero deaths that had gone on in the history of the DC Universe, including the death of the Flash, Barry Allen, in Crisis on Infinite Earths, the death of the second Robin, Jason Todd, in the classic Batman storyline, Death in the Family, the death of Superman in the 90s, as well as the death of Green Lantern, also in the 90s, shortly after the death of Superman. And then Deadman teams up with the Spectre. The plot was Deadman fighting an evil wizard who had escaped from Nanda Parbat and was trying to steal the souls of the fallen heroes before they could pass on to the afterlife. The story was finally concluded in a follow-up series, still written by Steve Vance and done by various artists, in 2002. This series lasted 9 issues, and it's about Deadman hunting down more escapees from Nanda Parbat, dealing with other ghosts, and an old enemy or two along the way, with his sidekick, Max Loomis, who is a midget acrobat detective. I love comic books, you know? You just can't make... Well, I mean, someone did make that up, but you just can't lie about that being a thing. But that's right. From the very beginning, in Strange Adventures number 205 in 1967, to the end of the 9-issue series in 2002, the original Deadman story really took a very long time to tell. It was a broken-up saga that took up 4 comic book series, 3 or 4 writers, and 34 years to tell. However, these were not the only Deadman stories out there. In 1991, a 2-issue series called Deadman, Love After Death was released by writer Mike Barron and artist Kelly Jones. Unlike the other Deadman stories, which are pretty much all superhero comics starring a supernatural character, this was a straight-up horror comic, with some twisted visuals and graphic imagery. The story involved Deadman falling in love with a female ghost who had to be freed by a curse brought about by her dead husband, and like Deadman, all the other ghosts were circus folk. In the following year, Jones and Barron launched a sequel called Deadman Exorcism, where Deadman actually goes crazy and turns evil, having been broken by all the things he's lost, and some of his friends are trying to return him to normal. These 2 stories have been collected in a trade paperback called Deadman Lost Souls. And they are really good, and kind of a little scary. Shortly after this, Deadman had a crossover comic with a bounty hunter anti-hero from space named Lobo. This book was called Lobo and Deadman, the Brave and the Bald, and involves Lobo being hired to capture Deadman and bring him to the baddest bad guy in the whole DC universe, Darkseid. As a Deadman comic, it's not very good. As a Lobo comic, it's fun, but the art's a little too ugly, and the whole comic is a little too 90s for my taste. Which, if you don't know anything about comic books, the 90s was not a good time for them. Although he didn't always have a ton of big starring roles Deadman did make guest appearances in a lot of comics, and one character he was frequently teamed up with was Batman. Deadman appears as a guest character in the story Batman Gotham County Line, where Batman investigates some supernatural murders going on in the suburbs at the city limits of Gotham City. Deadman also played a pretty big role in the Batman tie-in issues of the big event Blackest Night, where all the dead superheroes rose from the dead as evil space zombies. Again, comic books. They're great. However, probably one of my favorite ones of these team-ups is the original graphic novel Batman and Deadman, Death and Glory. The story is Batman is possessed by a ghost and made to go on a murder spree. And now he needs Deadman's help to clear his name and stop the ghost that took control of his body. One of the cool things is that when you start collecting stuff with a character, especially an obscure character like Deadman, the thing is, if you want to collect Batman books, you've got your work cut out for you, but you know what to look for. Batman and Superman and a bunch of other characters like them have tons of iconic storylines and have literally appeared in thousands of comic books. And they've had all these different starring roles and spin-off media. You've got video games about them, movies about them, TV shows starring them. There is a lot of material to work with. Deadman, not so much. You have to look for the small appearances, the part where he's just kind of a member of an ensemble cast. And when I looked for those, I came across some pretty cool stuff. There's a story called Reign in Hell that Deadman appears in briefly. The plot of the story is that the forces of hell and the forces of purgatory go to war with each other, and the magical superheroes have to take sides. There's another story called Day of Judgment, where the forces of hell invade Earth, and all the superheroes, with the help of magical heroes, have to put a stop to it. Then there was the big mega event, which spun out of Green Lantern and was a sequel to Blackest Night called Brightest Day. And unlike the others, where Deadman's just kind of a guest appearance, Deadman is actually the main character, or one of the main characters of this series. And he's actually brought back to life and has to find new purpose in living again. And then sometimes you do find stuff where a character does have a starring role. One such instance is a book called Solo No. 8. Solo was a series published by DC, where each issue would feature a bunch of stories with artwork by one single author. And in this case, the author was a guy named Teddy Christensen. And the main feature of the book was a short Deadman story, about 9 or 10 pages, and that story was written by one of the best authors in all of comic book history, Neil Gaiman, who's written some of the most critically acclaimed comics of all time, such as Sandman. He writes a lot of best-selling books, and he's even written movies, and is currently one of the writers on Doctor Who. Neil Gaiman is one of my favorite authors, and this story is really short. There's no action in it, but it's very human, and it touches on the human side of the character and what being a ghost is like. And it's one of my favorite stories starring him. It's a great example of just what makes the character so great. And if I hadn't started collecting stuff featuring Deadman, I never would have found it. Unfortunately, not everything with Deadman's name attached is good. Like I said, Lobo and Deadman is not a great comic, and also at one point, under the Vertigo imprint, which is what DC uses to kind of publish more mature, less traditional superhero stuff, often relating to horror, someone reinterpreted Deadman for Vertigo. Except the series is really only called Deadman in name, it has nothing to do with the character, and, well, honestly, it's just not that good. I managed to get the first few issues in one graphic novel for... I got them on sale for $5. And honestly, $5 is all I'd be willing to pay for this. And now I come to the modern stuff. In 2011, DC Comics rebooted everything. They got rid of all 75 years of continuity, with a few exceptions, and basically started all over to bring in new readers. And when they rebooted the universe, Deadman got an increased presence. Deadman was the star of the first story arc of the anthology series DC Universe Presents. The story went from issues 1 to 5, and it's called 20 Questions, and it's one of my most favorite comic book stories of all time. Basically, the plot is that Deadman is working for the goddess Ramakrishna, helping a bunch of unusual people with interesting lives sort out their unordinary problems. However, he's starting to notice some strange things on all of his missions, starting to doubt his purpose, and starting to believe that the goddess he works for has an ulterior motive. And so he decides to investigate it, and goes on a fun supernatural adventure along the way. This is collected in the first volume of DC Universe Presents, and I own the single issues to keep, and the volume to lend to other people so they can read it. I also own it digitally, so I purchased this story in full about 3 times in the span of 1 year, and have no regrets about it. In addition to that story, Deadman is also a member of a team book called Justice League Dark, which is a team of magical superheroes who basically deal with all the supernatural threats the normal Justice League isn't equipped to handle. Since issue number 15, I've been collecting every issue of Justice League Dark, which, since the reason isn't that big a deal for a Deadman collector, it's all pretty easy to come by. And I also have all the issues before 15 in the first 2 volumes of the book, released by DC as collected editions. In addition to books, Deadman's been featured on a fair amount of merchandise. There's this shirt, which is using artwork from one of the Strange Adventures covers. I honestly can't remember which. I think it might be 206, but don't quote me on that. There's also a bunch of toys. I own basically every bit of Deadman merchandise that has ever come out, because since he's not a very popular character, there's not a lot. There's 1 or 2 items I exclude, because even I, as a pretty hardcore Deadman collector, can't really justify spending $5 plus shipping on a Mighty Bean with Deadman's face on it, or a tiny piece of plastic about this big called a squidgy that looks really stupid and ugly anyway. What I can justify wasting money on are things like game pieces for a convoluted game played by nerds even more hardcore than me called HeroClix. There have been 3 Deadman HeroClix pieces, and I own all of them. There's one commemorating the DC Comics reboot, based on Justice League Dark. There's a version of him, alive again, part of a Brightest Day set. And then there's a classic one of him, which honestly I own, but I lost. I mean, I'm sure it's lying around somewhere. I just don't know where that is. But I do still have the card explaining how the character is played. And I read this thing and I have no idea what the hell they're talking about, because this game is incredibly convoluted and I'm never going to play it, and yet I own pieces of it because those pieces feature a character I like. And I am kind of crazy. There's also a couple smaller toys. There's this little thing. It's called a Deadman Mini-Mate. It's kind of like a Lego, only it sucks. And it was included in a 2-pack with another ghostly DC Comics character called the Spectre. There's also this interesting piece, part of a short line of DC toys called the Action League. The characters can swivel on the hips a bit, they can move their arms up and down. Some of them can turn their heads, but since he's got a high collar in the way, you can't see it. And this was released as part of the Brightest Day series, in a 2-pack with Martian Manhunter. What is not an advertised feature is that the head actually glows in the dark. Now I'm starting to get into actual action figures, and the first one was probably the hardest piece of merchandise to come by. This is the Deadman Justice League Unlimited action figure, based on designs by famous comic book artists, and well, really more animation artist Bruce Timm, based on Deadman's only appearance in Justice League Unlimited, Dead Reckoning. It's not very posable. You can just kind of move the arms and legs and turn the head a bit. That's basically it. And this was ridiculously hard to come by, because this was never released individually. It was released as part of a 6-pack featuring Superman and a few other heroes that goes on the market now that the figures are out of production for about $100. So I found it was just easier to find this thing on the used market on eBay than try to buy a brand new version. What I could get brand new versions of, however, were the first ever Deadman toy. This is the Other Worlds Deadman, released in 2001. It's kind of old. When you use it, the joints creak. I don't know if that's because of its age, the material it's made of, or a combination of both. It has weird posability options that are pretty fluid, and like the Action League figure, it glows in the dark. And considering that it's 12 years old, the glow isn't very bright, but I think it's impressive it's still there at all. Next up is one of my favorites. This is the realistic skeleton Deadman, as designed by legendary comics artist and painter Alex Ross in the comic book Kingdom Come. Its joints are in prefixed poses, but can be rotated. You might have actually seen this in another video of mine called the Justice League of Dignity. And my favorite feature about this guy is that the jaw can open and close. Up next is a version of Deadman based on his appearance in the comic Brightest Day, where he's alive again and has a normal human head. There's also a version of the character based on Black Lantern Deadman in Blackest Night, who actually has a little stand he comes with that gives the character the illusion of flight. For the last of the action figures is my favorite piece of the collection. This is part of Mattel's DC Universe Classic series. It's the DC Universe Classics Deadman figure. I believe it was part of Wave 11 of the series. It's got the most posability, hands and everything just turn around 100%. You can create a bunch of twisted and fun poses. Unlike a lot of the other figures in the series, it's really light because he's an acrobatic frame instead of a big bulky frame. And I have a special edition of the figure that have partially see-through hands and feet, giving him a more ghostly appearance, which is just a really nice touch, and not all versions of the figure have this. The final piece of physical merchandise is from a British company called Eagle Moss. They have a big DC Comics superhero collection. I'm not sure if it's still going on or not, but they're lead figurines of characters, 100% hand-painted. They're really nice, really sturdy, got a bit of weight to them, and every one of them comes with a collectible magazine which details the history of whatever character the figure is. And now for the final piece in my collection. And this is the big one. There's a term in comic book fandom called a Grail Comic, named after the Holy Grail. The idea behind a Grail Comic is basically that it's rare, it's valuable, and it holds a lot of meaning to the collector. So they're not all the same for everybody. While, like any fan, I'd like to own something like the first appearance of Superman or the first appearance of Batman, those aren't my Grail comics. I was first introduced to Deadman in this book right here. I purchased this 6 years ago when I started getting into comics. Its showcase presents the Brave and the Bold Batman team-ups. It's a 500-page book of old comics from the 60s reprinted in black and white instead of their original color on cheap paper. This is over 21 comics, 500 pages, and I picked it up for $17 at Borders back when Borders was still in business. Among these comics was Deadman, and this was the first comic I ever saw Deadman in. Batman and Deadman's team up in The Brave and the Bold, number 79. It introduced me to the character, it got me really interested in him. I started going online and reading up about him. I paid special attention when he came up in animation, like in the Justice League Unlimited episode Dead Reckoning, or the Batman Brave and the Bold episode Dawn of the Deadman. When I started going through this collection, and I started building it, and I had a good bit of money, I realized that I could afford to get a rare comic, which would be one of my Grail comics, really, or what for me is the Grail comic. And I gave it some thought, and then about a month ago I went online and I tracked it down and I ordered it. And in the past week, I got it. There's a group called the CGC, the Comics Guarantee Company, or the Certification Guarantee Company, something like that. And they are the experts on grading the quality of rare and collectible comics. They use a 0 to 10 or a 1 to 10 scale, and really, the higher you get, the more of a difference even 0.1 on your score can be. This is a 9.4 near mint condition copy of The Brave and the Bold, number 79, from 1968. It's the first meeting of Batman and Deadman. And more importantly to me, it's the first comic that introduced me to Deadman. This book right here, in its black and white reprint, here it is. This is what got me interested in the character in the first place. This is what started my little ghostly obsession. And it's just really amazing to me that I could even own something like this. Because I've looked it up online, and there are only about 20 known copies of this book in this good condition or higher. I'm never going to open the case this thing comes in. The only way I ever would be if I had the opportunity to get it signed by the artist, Neil Adams. That's it. It's the crown jewel of my Deadman collection. It's my Grail comic, and I own it. I've spent a little over a year amassing this collection, and it's pretty good. It's not a complete collection. Deadman Book 4 is coming out in January. A new Deadman toy based on Scribblenauts Unmasked is also coming out in January. There's a ton of Deadman comics I have yet to read. These are not all the physical books I own showing Deadman. This is not the digital collection of stuff I have featuring the character either. But I guess the reason I want to show this is because comics and superheroes are my passion. I'm not a big collector, I'm really more about collecting stories than stuff. But as you've seen, I do have a fair amount of stuff too. But I really just love it. I want to write stuff like this in the future. And I want to be able to share my own story ideas with people. And today, I guess, it's just that I've been collecting this for a while. And I just kind of wanted to share it with some people. I just wanted to share my passion and love for this one character who I think is the best that the genre has to offer and who pretty much nobody knows about. And it's just something that's really special to me, and I thought, yeah, you know, maybe one or two people out there might be interested. So, if you sat through all this, thank you for watching. Thank you for your interest. Have a nice day. And, you know, if you're interested in Deadman, why not pick up a comic book? The guy just appeared in The Phantom Stranger number 11, so, you know, there's that. It's a pretty good issue to start on. At least for Phantom Stranger. Go read Trinity War.